realized how easy it is to hold a grudge until several years ago when my family decided to go to a restaurant on Mother's Day. By family, I mean my sister, my two brothers, their kids, my parents, my husband, my kids. By the time we all got together, it would usually number like around 20 or 22 people. We had a favorite restaurant that we enjoyed going to. We went there often. In fact, we went there so many times that when my husband and I would go alone, the owner would always ask, "How's mom? How's dad?" So we had a great personal relationship with them. And one Mother's Day, my parents were elderly at the time, and it was Mother's Day. We decided to go there and just honor my mom. And I called the day before and made reservations for 22 people, and they said no problem. So made reservations for 1:30, and we got there maybe a tad early. And so I walked in and I said to the hostess, "Hi, my name's Mary. We've got reservations for 22 people at 1:30." And she said, "Okay." And then the rest of my family started coming, and pretty soon 22 of us were kind of gathered there in a section of the restaurant, feeling a little awkward because we're a pretty big group. And so the hostess came to us and said, "Your reservation is going to be a little late because there's another party that's sitting at a table, and they're a little slow in leaving." And I'm thinking, well, just ask them to hurry because we had reservations. We waited 45 minutes for the other party to leave so our group could be seated. Well, I was getting a little miffed over this. And I thought, well, probably what they'll do, they'll apologize, or they'll maybe give a 5 or 10% discount on the entire bill. Maybe they'll give our mom a free dessert for Mother's Day or just something. They never even acknowledged that they had made a mistake. And so that was kind of the topic of conversation. I can't believe we've been here so many times. We have been loyal customers, and they treat us like this. When we left the restaurant, I said to my husband, "I will never eat there again. I cannot believe how they treated us. I'm not going back there. In my mother's honor, I am not going back to that restaurant." And I kept my word. Even though it was one of my very favorite, they had awesome food, Middle Eastern. I love Middle Eastern. They cooked it well, but I deprived myself of eating at one of my favorite restaurants because I chose to hold on to an offense. In the long run, I'm the one who suffered because I'm the one who wasn't able to eat some of my favorite food. The restaurant, in the meantime, had no idea that I was holding an offense. I was holding a grudge. They had no idea that I'd drive by and I'd think, "Oh man, I hope you guys just go out of business because you made us wait 45 minutes and you never apologized." Instead, they prospered and they ended up opening a second location. Aren't grudges crazy things? They're actually living things that can be fed and coddled and hugged and nursed. And it seems with a grudge that the longer we hold the grudge, the more it's going to grow. And the more we nurse a grudge, the longer it lives. Grudges begin as molehills of offense that become huge mountains made up of anger and held in place by stubbornness and pride. We're too prideful to admit that maybe we might have had something to do or to cause the offense. We're too stubborn to just let it go and maybe just give the person a break and just say, "Oh, they made a mistake. They really didn't understand," and just kind of let it go. And then anger in itself is what feeds that grudge and causes it to even grow more. Somebody said that a grudge is allowing the other person to live in our head rent free, like a squatter who just lives there, doesn't belong there, but yet is able to control emotions and thoughts and words and actions. And when we hold on to that grudge, it seems that Whatever conversation we have is always going to gravitate back to that person or that situation that caused us to start holding that grudge in the first place. So how can we mount grudge from our lives so we're not allowing anything or anyone to remain within us that does not belong there? Let me give 3 ways. First of all, we have to take ownership for anything that we might have done to cause the offense or even in our reaction to the offense. If you read in Joel 3, which was the chapter that we're focusing on, you'll notice that the cities of Tyre and Sidon and the region of Philistia they held a grudge against God. In fact, God said, "Are you repaying me for something I have done?" So they not only held a grudge against God, but they wanted retribution against him. And so they were, they had just done some evil things against God's people, against the Israelites. They sold their women and children into slavery. They mocked them for serving God and for believing God, and they killed the Israelites. So they were not good to the Israelites, and God does not take something like that sitting down. But the problem was, it was Tyre and Sidon and Philistia's fault, because they were the ones who attacked Israel. And then they began holding a grudge against God when God brought judgment on them. We need to take ownership. If there might be something that we have done that caused the offense, we need to take ownership of that. And even if we might not have done something, we need to take ownership for our reaction, because sometimes our reaction to a situation can be worse than the situation itself. When I told you my restaurant story, you're probably thinking, "Mary, that was such a silly thing to hold a grudge over." And you're exactly right. But you see, it was stubbornness that caused me to keep that grudge rather than just releasing it and saying, "The hostess made a mistake. Oh well, we'll go there next week and eat and we'll just forget about it." But I held on to that for years, and it left a bad taste in my mouth as a result of that situation. When we're offended, we need to check our response and not make a mountain out of a molehill. And then secondly, we need to always err on the side of meekness. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said we should not pay back eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. If an evil person strikes us on one cheek, we need to turn the other cheek and let them strike us. He said that we should go, even if someone tells us to go 1 mile, we should go with them 2 miles. What that meant was, in those days, Israel was under Roman rule. And a Roman soldier could go to a Jew and say, "Hey, I need you to carry my load. I need to use your horse or your donkey or your mule or your camel. And I need you to carry my load and go take it a mile down the road." Now that was the obligatory mile. They had to do what the Roman soldier said, even if it inconvenienced them. So they were obligated to go 1 mile. But it would actually end up being 2 miles, because they'd have to return back 1 mile to get back to the point where they first started. Jesus said, don't just go 1 mile, the obligatory mile. He said, go a voluntary mile beyond that, which actually would be 4 miles, because you do the obligated mile, then the voluntary mile, then you'd have to go 2 miles all the way back. That sounds so wimpy, doesn't it? It sounds so weak. In fact, we confuse meekness with weakness, probably, I guess, because they rhyme, meek and weak. But we also look at the response and the action that Jesus is telling us to have as being kind of weak, and there's something in us that wants to rise up and we want to defend ourselves. But there are times we don't need to do that, and we shouldn't do that. Meekness comes from the term being meeked, which comes from the training of horses. When horses were going to be trained for battle, and one of the methods they would use would be to light a fire under the belly of the horse. If a horse felt the heat and bolted off and just started to run because they couldn't stand that heat, it meant that they were not meeked for battle. But when a horse was trained enough that they could feel the heat underneath them, but they were able to control themselves and not run off and bolt, they were meeked for battle. Some offenses are going to feel like a heat within us, and we're going to want to just bolt off and just react without even thinking. But meekness will cause us to control the strength that we actually have, and we can hold steady and hold still so we're not doing things that we later regret. If we will follow the perfect model of Jesus, we'll end up being stronger in the end because we're always erring on the side of meekness. And then thirdly, we need to leave payback to God. If you noticed in Joel chapter 3, God came to the defense of the Israelites. Tyre, Sidon, and the regions of Philistia had treated Israel very unfairly, but God came to their defense, and he will come to our defense. Moses said, "It is God's to avenge. He will repay." And then Isaiah said, "The Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of retribution to uphold Zion's cause." Now, God is a perfect blend of mercy and justice. When he seems to be responding slower than what we think he should, that's his mercy. But the day will come when the Lord will pay back, and that is his justice. But if we hold onto things so tightly, then what we're actually doing is tying God's hands from being able to defend us in the way that he wants to do that. Payback is expensive, and we need to let God pay the price, not us. Paul said, God is just, and he will pay back trouble to those who trouble you. But holding a grudge keeps God from being able to come to our defense. Releasing a grudge is like turning a mountain back into a molehill. It's like shrinking a heavy paperweight back into the size of a marble. Many offenses begin just this size. The thing about a marble is I could put this down right now on my desk and it would just roll off the desk. But what we do many times will add to the offense, and we'll become so aggravated, and we'll repeat it, and we'll feed it, and we'll coddle it, and the anger and the frustration will cause it to grow. But the difference between the marble and the paperweight, besides the size, is the paperweight has been designed to have a bottom, to have a straight bottom that it won't roll off. It will stay on my desk, and it will hold the papers all in place. But this thing is heavy compared to the marble. How much better it would be if we would just release the offense and just let it roll off and it's gone, rather than build it into a heavy paperweight that is going to stay within our sight and our view all the time, serving as a reminder of the offense. We need to just let it go. Oh, by the way, a few years ago, somebody gave me a gift card to the very restaurant that treated us so poorly several years ago. My initial response was, I'm not going there. And then finally, the cool hand of reason sort of settled me down and said, Mary, you're going to get a free meal. Just let it go. My husband and I went. We enjoyed the meal. It was a free meal. We thank God for the people who gave us the gift card. And it left a really good taste in my mouth. So it just felt really good to be back. Don't hold on to that grudge. Just let it go. Don't let stubbornness and pride hold a mountain of anger in place. Don't let anything or anyone live rent-free in your head. Before I give you closing remarks, let me give you this next week's assignment. We are halfway through the 25 questions God asked. And next week, we're going to be looking at chapter 12 in the book. There are 8 questions in the Bible that nobody asked. Isn't that amazing? But God specifically stated those questions, and he prefaces them with, but nobody asked. Nobody asked. So we're going to be looking at one of those 8 questions next week. It's in chapter 12 in the book. And I'd like for you to read Jeremiah chapter 2. And we're going to be talking next week about spiritual curiosity. This past week we celebrated Easter, and of course, a couple days before Easter is Good Friday, when we just recognize and remember the death of Jesus on the cross and the amazing price that he paid just for our forgiveness, for our redemption, for our healing, for our deliverance, everything on that cross. When Jesus was sharing with the disciples what was about to happen, they reacted. And Jesus said, you know, I could ask my heavenly Father for 12 legions of angels, and he would send them. Now, a legion was anywhere from 1,000 to 6,000 fighting men. And if Jesus could snap his finger and request 12 legions of angels, that would have been anywhere from 12,000 to 72,000 angels who would have been at his disposal, come to his defense. Boy, you talk about turning the city of Jerusalem upside down. If 72,000 fighting warrior angels came to defend the Son of God. But again, Jesus was meek, and he worked from a controlled strength. And he willingly went to the cross, even though he had the ability and the resources and the power to be able to request those angels. So he's hanging on the cross. And as he's hanging there for those 3 hours, he's looking at the group of people, the Roman soldiers, the spiritual leaders, the ones who rejected him, the ones who mocked him and reviled him and made false accusations against them. Some of his last words were, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. He actually was excusing the actions of the very people who crucified him. Now, I'm sorry. These people may not have known that they were crucifying the Son of God, and for many of them, it came as a reality after Jesus died. But they knew that they were crucifying an innocent man. And so for Jesus to excuse the actions of people who knew they were crucifying someone who had no offense against him, that is huge. My question for you this week is, what would it take for you to excuse the actions of someone who has offended you? Think about that. I'll be praying for you this week. God bless you. Remember, just shrink those mountains back into a molehill. Bring that heavy paperweight back down to marble size. Let it roll away. God bless you. Just to know you and to make you know we left your name.